Assalamualaikum everyone. Today we would like to present our research methodology entitled Factors that Influence the Number of Tourist Arrivals from Selected Countries to Malaysia. Tourism is a major contributor to the national economy. In 2019, the number of international tourists increased compared to 2018. Therefore, the increasing trend of international tourists to Malaysia should be observed. In this research, the researcher will focus on the factors that influence and contribute the most for the increasing international demand for tourism in Malaysia. The purpose of the study will be for analyzing the number of tourist arrivals in Malaysia from the selected countries, which are Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand and China. According to a previous research, there are several factors that influence tourist arrival to Malaysia, including GDP, income and exchange rates. However, such research has been scarce in recent years. Do these factors still influence tourist arrivals? As a result, this research attempts to fill in the gaps left by previous research, in which the research had to focus on how relevant those factors are to Malaysian tourism industry. In addition, GDP, income and exchange rate as an independent variable with transportation costs added as a fourth independent variables.
This research question aims to identify is there any relationship between gross domestic products, GDP, income, exchange rate, transportation costs and the number of tourist arrivals from selected countries to Malaysia. The main purpose of conducting this research is to investigate the relationship between GDP, income, exchange rate, transportation costs and the number of tourist arrivals from selected country to Malaysia.
Tourism is the third largest contributor to Malaysia's GDP right after manufacturing and commodities. This research will identify whether the independent variables discussed by the previous researchers are still relevant to the Malaysian tourism industry or not. In this research, it focused in the top 4 tourist arrivals in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, China and Thailand. Also, the new independent variable applied was transportation costs. The analysis and information in this research will benefit the policymakers and firms in tourism and guide information for future research. However, there are some limitations faced by the researchers in making this research, such as difficulty to access secondary data in data stream for an extended period, having other academic obligations need to be fulfilled on time, limited project time frame and sample size of research that based on 4 countries only. All of these limitations can indirectly affect the final result of the research project.
Let's move on to the topic of the literature review. First of all, the dependent variable used in this research is the number of tourist arrivals in Malaysia from selected countries which are from Singapore, Indonesia, China and Thailand. After a thorough observation made by several researchers regarding the tourist arrivals being applied as a dependent variable, they agreed that most researchers have used the number of visitor arrivals as a proxy for tourism demand in their studies. The data for other potential variables such as tourist expenditures, receipts and number of nights spent only available for limited time and countries, which makes the tourist arrivals as the most ideal factor for the dependent variables.
Gross domestic product is the first independent variable that we use for this research. According to the previous research, Hafiz, Fauzi and Razif found that there is a positive relationship between the GDP and number of tourist arrivals. Same goes with Kim, who found that the majority of visitors from Korea to Japan have a significant effect on GDP. On the other hand, Wati found that there are insignificant results between GDP and the number of tourist arrivals from Singapore, Malaysia, Australia and the United States to come and visit Indonesia.
Next, for income, the term income can have a range of meanings depending on the context. According to researcher Yoli Fen, Long Du Yin and Li Ching Chen, there is a long-term equilibrium relationship between the number of tourists and resident income. However, according to Liu Jia, tourist spending has a wide range of consumer characteristics and there is a strong link between tourist demand and per capita and pricing increases. So tourist demand is positively associated to income level and negatively related to pricing. So, another literature review is exchange rate. According to the Tang, in 2019 research, exchange rate affect a tourist demand. As a result, the presence of a one-way statistical correlation between the exchange rate and the international tourists was established by the finding of the causal analysis. In fact, tourist arrival have a significant effect on the exchange rate from Nauji and Tang in their research in 2011.
Transportation costs can be defined as the total expenses spent by the tourists for traveling or transporting to the destination. Some obstacles have been faced when choosing the transportation costs because it is difficult to collect actual data for the variable. There are many subjects that have been used by each researcher as the proxy to it, such as the price of crude oil, distance between capital city, and airfares. Mixed results have been found for the variable. For example, Poor and others in 2014 observed that negative relationship between travel costs and Singaporean tourists' arrival in Malaysia. Connor and Kim examined that economy in Hawaii was majority contributed from tourism sector. Song, Wit and Lee stated that income and transportation costs were highly correlated in 2009. Also, Choya in 2008 and Kadir and Karim in 2009 say that no significant result from there and discouraged this variable to be used in the tourism demand model.
Next, we move to the research framework. The research framework development provides a better understanding and a clear picture of what we are trying to deliver in our study. So this is a primary aim to determine the significant relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. So in our study, we use the number of tourist arrival in Malaysia from selected country as a dependent variable, and the independent variable, which is a gross domestic product, income, exchange rate, and transportation costs.
Moving on to the research analysis. The researchers had used the EView software to run several analysis tests to observe the relationship between variables. Firstly, normality test. If the p-value of Jaguara is more than the significance level, which is 5%, the data is considered normally distributed. For this research, the p-value is 0.766783, which is more than 5%. Therefore, the researchers failed to reject the null hypothesis, which means the data is normally distributed. The result of skewness and kurtosis shows that the data is positively skewed to the right tail, as well as peak with less dispersion, as can be seen on the histogram graph. Next is the correlation analysis. The results will display the strength of the relationship between the variables. Among the four variables, GDP is the only variable that has a negative relationship with the dependent variable, while the others have a positive relationship. Income and exchange rate have a strong and positive relationship. However, transportation cost is the only variable that has a weak positive and no relationship with the dependent variable due to the p-value of more than 0.05. Lastly is the regression analysis. If the p-value is less than the significance level of 0.05, the variable is significant. Based on the results, the exchange rate is the only significant variable because the p-value is less than 0.05, while the others are all insignificant. Moreover, as the probability F statistic is at 0, it indicates that the model established in this research is fit. Also, the adjusted R-square indicates that 92.4% of the variance in the number of tourist arrivals from selected countries to Malaysia can be explained by the variation of the four independent variables.
From the regression analysis, the result obtained by researchers is there is an insignificant relationship between number of tourist arrivals and gross domestic product, since the p-value is more than 0.05 of level significance, which is 0.1957. In other words, the researchers need to accept null hypothesis and reject alternative hypothesis. This result was supported by another research, Wati, that mentioned in literature review before, and it is because of any special circumstance that have occurred between GDP and number of tourist arrivals.
Because of the probability value is less than the significance limit of 0.05, income has a relationship with the independent variables according to the correlation analysis. The income coefficient of negative 13.90% also demonstrates this. It can be explained that for every 1% increase of income, the number of tourist arrival decreases by 13.90%, providing all other variables remain constant. To reinforce this, Huang Chan discovered the starting distribution wage rate, the percentage of tourism expenditure for each income category to determine the initial national income. The effect has the greater impact on tourism in middle income countries, whereas the fundamental impact of starting national income has a greater impact on long-term tourism demand.
So, in finding, based on correlation analysis for exchange rate, it showed that the exchange rate has a strong relationship between the number of tourist arrival in Malaysia from the selected country. This is because the probability value is smaller than the significant level, which is 0.05. Based on previous research, HUZAIMAH in 2018 found a negative and significant effect of the exchange rate on the long-term tourist demand in Pakistan. So, other than that, tourist arrival are influenced positively by the exchange rate. These findings are consistent with yearly research HUZAIMAH in 2019. From the regression table above, it showed that the p-value is 0.000, which is less than 0.05 in the significant level. Furthermore, the foreign exchange rate in Malaysian ringgit has shown a consistent outcome with both the predict and actual signs indicating a negative number. It indicates that if the Malaysian ringgit currency value falls, the number of tourist arrival in Malaysia from a selected country would rise. This research was supported by Yusof, Kanyan, Kasuma, Kamaruddin and Adeline in 2016, who claimed that unpleasant change in exchange rate for tourists could limit the numbers of tourists prepared to travel, resulting in reduced tourist arrival in Malaysia.
This research has shown the result from two analyses, correlation and regression. In the correlation analysis, the value of 0.0290 indicate that transportation cost has a weak positive relationship as the value lower than 0.3. It was supported by a research in 2017 that said air transportation had a positive impact on the inbound tourism rate. Dolida Hanim in 2008 also observed positive relationship between both variables in Thailand and Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the regression analysis done show that there is no relationship between transportation costs and number of tourist arrivals. The probability value of 0.5887 was higher than 0.05, explained that null hypothesis failed to be rejected. So, changes in transportation costs will have no significant effect on tourist arrivals. It was consistent with research from Adiola 2018 that travel costs in 44 African countries were found not to be significant, and so 2017 between air transport costs and domestic tourism demand in New Zealand that also not significant.
Now, finally is the conclusion and recommendation for future researchers. All the result findings for the four variables had been supported by several results from the previous research, and this research concludes that the exchange rate is the only significant variable that influencing the number of tourist arrivals from selected countries to Malaysia. For the recommendations, firstly, the researchers suggested that further studies on tourist arrivals can be carried out but for other settings, as this research only focused the tourist arrivals within the Asian region. Other researchers could explore more on the international tourism demand on Malaysia from other continents such as Europe, Africa, South and North America and so on. Other than that, the tourism sector had been greatly affected by the arrival of the coronavirus back in 2019. Therefore, further research such as the effects of the pandemic of COVID-19 on the tourism sector shall be conducted by the further researchers. Lastly, the contribution towards knowledge. Based on this research, there are 7.6% of other factors that can explain the tourist arrivals from Singapore, Indonesia, China and Thailand into Malaysia. Therefore, other researchers could use other variables such as population, consumer price index, and more to contribute new insights and perspective on the factors that influence tourist arrivals to Malaysia for the development of the local and international tourism sector. That's all from us. Thank you.